Welcome to Collaborative Culture, and this will be the really important part of collaborativeness is trying to define all that we're trying to do. So we've realized that in the discussions that we had around the ESHIP team, and when I refer to the ESHIP team, I'm primarily talking about Christine, Andy, Lauren Higgins, and myself. Enoch is in and out of conversations. He's working on some other stuff, but so that's primarily the ESHIP team, the four of us. And we spent a lot of time in the past couple of weeks talking about how we align the efforts going forward and what we have as a role in the things that we bring to the table and what we want to share out with all of you. So if you'll indulge me for a minute, I'm going to go over that kind of briefly, and then we'll have everyone check in. And so it'll give you time to start thinking about the question that I'm going to have you popcorn on, which will be, let's think of a good question. What is the easiest and hardest parts of trying to be collaborative? And I'm going to leave that kind of wide open. So what's easy when it comes to collaboration, and what's hard and challenging? So what are your hurdles and things? So we can discuss how we can maybe help each other overcome them. So as we go into this work, into the deliver phase of what we're looking at, we realized that the role that the foundation and Christine and myself as ESHIP community activators is there's certain things that we want to make sure that we have going forward, and what we're going to promise to deliver on. And keeping in mind that Christine and I, though we're supported by the foundation, really do work for the community. Our job and responsibility is to support the community in being able to do what you do. So in being able to do what you do, we help create an opportunity to foster relationships and create friendships and bonds amongst all of you. So that's some of these calls, that's the social media stuff that I kind of oversee, like the Facebook page and the Slack channel. So it gives you an avenue to discuss things. Also, what we work on is visibility. And in visibility, we try to make sure that what's being done on one end is translated to what's being done amongst all of your local ecosystems and how you do ecosystem building in Andy's favorite phrase, custom and bespoke ways. And so in alignment, think of alignment as the coordination, and that's maybe more about like a framework of traffic laws. So traffic laws are a suggestion. They're kind of put in place so we don't collide into each other. We don't run over each other. And so trying to foster a community where we're able to support that and help with visibility and alignment. Those are the things that we bring. The next step in more coordination and working in tandem and collaboration, that's where all of you come in. That's not something that we can mandate or we can force, not that anyone would want to, but it's more about giving the opportunity for those things to happen. And so there's been questions around how do we do that better? I think we share best practices, and there's a lot of hope and there's a lot of discussion around that, but for the most part, it's really done amongst all of you. In some of the things that happened at ESHIP and just after, there was some confusion about some things going on. Like Brett and Forward Cities, and the work that you're doing has come prior to the ESHIP Summit, like the last ESHIP Summit before the initiatives were formed. There was a relationship. And so when Andy had spoken about Forward Cities as an example of an initiative, it's not that their initiative solves for one of the initiatives that we brought forward. It is a rendition or a way that an organization is. So it's an example of how an organization is working on metrics and community building among ecosystem building. So all of these initiatives are just possibilities and ideas and notions, and what we're hoping for is projects under each of those, maybe sometimes even more than one project. Some initiatives, it doesn't make sense for more than one project, like the Common Lexicon. It's silly to have more than one dictionary, right? We want to get everyone to talk about the terms in the same way, so it makes sense to have just one. But there are other initiatives like a certification for ecosystem builders or a fellowship for ecosystem builders. In those things, there can be more than one version of those, and that's okay. So I want you to remember that the goals are the 7 that we talk about. The initiatives are the ideas or the notions for those projects. And then project teams are the individual iteration of one of those projects. Does that make sense to everyone? Does anybody have any questions around that before we go further? Okay, so hearing none, a couple of the things that we're going to work on doing from the point that we start inviting people that are post-summit, so that communication will be coming out shortly, and hopefully by the end of the month, we will get the email out to the greater Kauffman community, so anybody who's signed up for the newsletter, and we'll be inviting them to be on the call. So be prepared for next month to have a whole bunch of new people on the calls. We will always have new people coming and some people dropping in and dropping out as their energy allows. So there's always going to be some need for level setting. What we thought would be very helpful is that these calls should be an opportunity to come together and learn from each other. So we want to establish some peer learning opportunities. And we also want to make sure that we have visibility and alignment around each of the projects. So the proposal that I sent over in the email to introduce all of you to the call has the proposal. So please feel free to chime in on those things. You're free to leave comments and we'll address them or we'll look into it. So the call should go like this. Every month we get together, the project team leaders, whoever's involved in a project, will give us an update so that everybody kind of knows what's going on. Maybe there's opportunities to collaborate. Maybe there's a question or something that's needed. Then we're going to have some kind of 10 or 15 minute opportunity to learn from each other or from somebody else. I want you to start thinking about subjects that you would like to talk about, subjects that you would like to learn more about around, for this particular call, collaborative culture. Maybe that's like asking Fabian, who was one of our Firestarter speakers from the 2018 summit, to come and talk, or we can view his Firestarter video and discuss it. Maybe it's trying to get Peter Block, who talks about communities, to come and be on our call for a while and discuss communities and community building. Whatever it is that you're interested in, I will be asking ESHIP champions and other people on the call, whoever on the call feels motivated and drawn to want to be involved in this is exactly who should be involved in trying to coordinate that. And whether you help coordinate that for a month or 3 months or 6 months or a year, that's your commitment level is totally up to you. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. Does anybody have any input or feedback on any of that? Something that should change, something that you think sounds wonky? Okay, so with that, we'll officially launch the call. So the question was, what is the hardest and the easiest part of trying to get collaboration going? And maybe for me, it's trying to get those words out. So I'm going to popcorn to Malika.
Okay, so the easiest part of collaboration is, I think, when you have people that are passionate around a shared goal. And so the easiest part is getting that energy together and getting those people together. I think the hardest part, there's two hardest parts to me. One is making sure the right people are in the room, right? So a lot of times yes, I am. Okay, working from home. Okay, so the hardest parts are making sure the right people are in the room, because we often will invite people that we know. And so that may not always get the right people there. So we have to be intentionally inclusive. And then two, working through the competition piece of it, right? Because even in collaboration, people are still coming, they may be working in the same space. And so we still have this tendency to work from a position of scarcity. So getting over the competition to the collaboration. Did y'all hear me? Okay, good. And I'm gonna popcorn to Brett, since I don't know him. Hi, Brett.
Malika. All right, well, you kind of stole mine. So I'm thinking for the easy part. I mean, collaboration is always easiest when you're bringing together people who are after the same thing. And typically in the type of work, any type of work I've ever been in, you're around like-minded entities. So trying to launch collaboration as a concept that will better all the participants' understanding and justify their time and energy, that part's easy. Where I run into trouble, especially on this type of work, is when we fail to reach consensus, especially in larger groups. So you'll get a group of 12 people and you have 3 different factions, when you've gone down a path of trying to address a barrier that one specific neighborhood has around entrepreneurship. And then it becomes challenging because a lot of people won't have that willingness to bend based on their prior experience and understandings to any kind of middle ground consensus. Where it really bears itself out is then when you have to develop some outgrowth solutions from these kind of conversations, and you float those to the group, and you can tell instantly who feels like they weren't heard or included at the level that they would want to be in those kind of considerations. So that can be a tough thing to navigate. And then I don't see, oh, there we go. There's Eric. I'm gonna popcorn to you.
Alrighty, but good comments so far. I'll start with hardest first. I think there's the 2 things. So one, and we'll touch on everything again and again and again. There's sort of establishing all that trust. I mean, that's something that I think if I haven't done the work to kind of establish, awareness and building relationships and that kind of that sense of trust among folks who are collaborating, that can lead to trouble. So doing the hard work to do that, I think, is always important. A different thing that I experiencing even just today is when you're involved in a collaboration and the thing that seems like the right thing to do for the long-term collaboration doesn't necessarily fit into the best short-term interests of your own organization. How do you sell that? How do you do those kinds of things, believing in, I think sometimes knowing that the longer term is gonna benefit everyone, and including your organization. But it's not always easy to do a thing that doesn't, seems like it might not completely be in line with what your organization wants to do in the immediate future. So those are 2 hard things I'll share. I think we already talked about it, but it's the easy thing is once you've established that trust and once you have that knowledge of who you're working with, that's just like even when you're working on hard challenges, when you're working on them with people you respect, like, and trust, that's just fantastic. So, get through the hard stuff to work on the easy stuff. I will popcorn to Tiffany. Thanks.
Hey guys, I definitely totally agree with what Malika was saying about the energy. I think the easiest and the funnest part of collaborating is all of the different perspectives, and when you bring them together, and really in the beginning when those ideas start coming up and everyone's real excited and sharing and about, so many possibilities and the potential. That's the easiest and I think the funnest part of collaborating. What is difficult sometimes is when people are not speaking the same language, but they think they are. So, projects either get stopped or there's bumps in the road or feelings are hurt or whatever, when it's all completely unintentional and it's just because of those different perspectives that everyone's bringing to the table. Sometimes you just can't see it from the other person's perspective until you have that continued communication, but that part can be difficult. So with that, I'll throw it to Mary.
Wait, I think I was unmuted to begin with. I hope I wasn't being noisy. Sorry, guys. So for me, I think that the best part of collaboration is learning from other people. I think we all tend to, we're experts in our own field, but when you put many great minds together, you can develop something much stronger and much more phenomenal and much more far-reaching than you can just on your own, which is the entire concept of ecosystem building, right? It's many hands make for light work. I think that the most difficult thing about collaboration, in addition to what everybody has said, is that, it has to be timely. You can't just keep dragging it out. Like, action has to happen through collaboration. And so I think that that's keeping your volunteers interested, keeping them engaged, keeping them on the same page so there isn't distrust, and then trying, like everybody has said, joining a lot of different minds and a lot of different people for a long period of time is difficult. So that's what I got. So back to you, Cecilia.
Okay, great. Thank you. So a couple of things that you all talked about, which reminded me of some things that I've read lately or not too long ago. We talk about trust, and trust is a really hard thing sometimes to come by. I know Dan Coyle, who wrote The Culture Code, which has been a favorite book of mine recently, he said that, we try to really foster building trust so that people will be open to being vulnerable. And he says it actually works the other way around, that if you are vulnerable, people trust you quicker and more intensely because they see that vulnerability in you. Does that make sense? So it establishes trust. What Malika was talking about having the people at the table, Ori Brahms wrote a book called, I think it was in the Chaos Imperative, where he was taking an example of several communities that he was working with, and they tried to get everyone to the table, and every time somebody said, oh, and those other people, they would stop the meeting and invite the other people to the table. Now, that's really hard to do on an ongoing basis, but it definitely allows for very collaborative culture. He gave an example of a hospital where people got together and they were talking about renovations on, and I don't know if I've told this story, it's on an infectious disease wing. And so the big problem in this hospital was that they couldn't get hot water to the infectious disease wing, which made cleaning the patients very difficult. And if anybody knows anything about infectious diseases, you have to bathe them and keep them clean and the area sterile as possible so that you don't transmit all of those diseases. So they're in this room, doctors, lawyers, the legal staff, the doctors, the nurses, the administrative staff, and they were talking about renovating the hospital. and how it was going to cost millions of dollars to start on the infectious disease wing, to realign the pipes and all of that stuff. And somebody kind of called attention to themselves, and they said, I think this might be a silly thing to say, but has anyone checked the valve? And it was one of the janitors. And so there's obviously a hot water valve that gets turned on and off to release the hot water in. And he said, you've probably all thought about this as you're talking about renovation. Well, nobody had thought of this because hospital admins don't think about hot water valves, neither do nurses and doctors. And so nobody actually checked to see. And so they all got up and walked over the janitorial closet and pushed back some stuff. And sure enough, all they needed to do was turn the lever. So it's a really simple story about the fact that having everybody at the table or diverse perspectives makes a big difference. So is that going to happen all the time? I don't know, but it's a really good example of the need for those voices. So I appreciate that, Malika, for having you bring that to the table. So to that end, how do we make sure that we have the right people at the table? And I'm just going to throw it out there. Like, who do you think are missing in these conversations as we talk about entrepreneurial ecosystem building? And who can we invite to come and sit at this table?
Can I go here?
Of course.
We don't have hardly any like small business, do we? How many? I think all of us are probably small business in some way, but working on entrepreneurial ecosystems. I haven't met a lot of other people like me, I guess. Mostly it's university or nonprofit or government or something like that.
So are you talking small business like Main Street?
Mm-hmm.
So there are members of Main Street coalitions that are involved in the ESHIP community. I don't know that they're on the calls, but I mean, that may be something to bring up. We could actually put out a call. So maybe that's compiling a list, Mary, of people that you don't see on the calls that would be helpful to have in these discussions. So maybe if we can start a discussion like on Slack or on Facebook that says, hey, there are monthly calls going on and here are some people that we think, should be on the calls. And if you're one of them, we'd love to have you. Does that sound like a good idea?
Yeah, I think that brings up, when you say Main Street Alliance, that brings up another gap that I think I see are the people who are doing direct technical assistance provisions. So like SCORE and SBA and funders in general. Do we have lenders in this? And, SBDCs and WBDCs. I've seen some WBDCs in here. And I've seen libraries. But when I say entrepreneurs, I don't mean like Main Street Alliance. I mean like the actual entrepreneurs who are on Main Street. Because building an ecosystem that's designed to help entrepreneurs, we have to have the entrepreneurs' input.
And I agree with you to an extent. I think that depending on the entrepreneur, like serial entrepreneurs have maybe a better understanding, but I know that when I was a new entrepreneur, I didn't know what I needed. Like I was just doing my best to keep my head above water and pay my bills and get to the next step. So I don't know if we do them a service by trying to get them involved in this when they're still trying to do the thing that they're trying to do. Eric, you're off mute, so you have something.
I've raised my hand. Yeah, I think, and that's always the balance that I think Cecilia and the ESHIP team are trying to strike here is, how do we get folks in that are going to be productive, but not also sidetrack things. So, and that's to the nature, kind of the field level of these calls. So we're really talking about the field of ecosystem building versus kind of the more tactical stuff that ecosystem builders have to do in their communities. So I know, for instance, I invited a small business owner from my community who is doing some leadership work in our community. I invited her, tried to make sure that she was part of ESHIP this last time. So I know that there's a handful of those folks who they've kind of raised their hands and said they want to be involved. But I think until they're already sort of investing and thinking about these ecosystem building kind of topics, then that might not be a match. So yeah, I think I do agree that we kind of need to lean in and continue to ask the question of how we might involve people who have that perspective. And I don't have a great answer, but just say that we keep trying.
No, I think that's great. I think that a good example of people like that are like Adam and Matthew at KC Startland. They probably have coffee with more entrepreneurs on a weekly, monthly, yearly basis than like 1 million cups, right? So I know that anytime I'm around Adam and an entrepreneur comes along, he's always like, okay, hey, let's get coffee. And he's booking the appointment right then and there. So I think people like that think about it on a field level and have those interactions are really great people to have. So I like Mary's point about keeping entrepreneurs front and center, because we always talk about doing that. But it seems to me that may be a more productive way of trying to engage that entrepreneurial lens that we don't use, that we don't always engage on a systems or a field level. What do you think, Malika? You work with entrepreneurs too.
Yeah, I think for most entrepreneurs, they're working on getting their business, working on their business. But there are entrepreneurs, as Eric mentioned, that are doing leadership type of work, grabbing people, pulling them in, participating in different ways, like in things like 1 million cups. That would be great for this, but otherwise I think it would be confusing. It takes a while to get oriented to kind of pull yourself up out of your local focus into kind of what we're trying to do at a field level. And I think it can, and it's taking me some time. I still struggle with it. And I think, kind of getting too many people that are kind of still focused on their business might be challenging. And maybe there's a better way to get actual small business owners involved.
So Eric, will you share what you just typed in and the thoughts behind that?
I should unmute myself first. And the other thing that I'm wondering sort of tactically is I'm guessing that based on some of the different projects that are bubbling up under each of the different goals, some of those probably will benefit from the perspective of the end user, of the person in the community that's small business, whatever kind of entrepreneur they are. I'm guessing that some of the project's teams are going to need to sort of interface with those folks. But since these goal calls are primarily for the ecosystem builder folks in the variety of roles we have, I think the project team is probably a better place to look for those opportunities. Not sure, but it's just my impression.
I think that's a good engagement point. I know for me, when I was doing more entrepreneurial focused or locally focused things, going to ESHIP was like drinking from a fire hose. It's a lot of stuff. And then there's a page towards the end of the playbook that talks about the different perspectives in the field versus local. So it has the person looking through the binoculars, looking down on the local stuff, and then there's people looking across at the field stuff. So that's a good illustration of which lens we're looking through. Mary, go ahead and tell us a little bit more about what you're chatting about.
Okay, so I come at this, I think, from a very different view than a lot of people, because I have been a TA provider for a nonprofit up until April of this year. At the same time, I've been a business owner, but my main focus has been like ecosystem building while building my business. It's been a really unique perspective. But I am in the field as well, like consistently at networking and doing coffees and learning what people know and what they don't, and what organizations know and what they don't. I think before we launch this as sort of a best practice, if those people aren't going to be at the table, because it would be difficult to bring some of them in now and have way more people at the table. I was just mentioning the gaps I saw because that was the question. I would say that we would at least want to test this out with them, show them the program before we launch it and put it out there into the world and say, this is the best practice. It's always better to ask first and say, does this seem feasible to you as an SBDC member or as an economic development person, or within your community? Or can you see, because you're a rural community or an urban community or whatever your community is this feasible? And make sure that it's something that is globally utilized or useful for entrepreneurs and TA providers in all those different communities. I'm just worried that if we put something together and it's all of our minds, sometimes when you're involved in putting together a project and you don't have those fresh eyes come in and look at it, you miss things. And I know all of us are experts in our fields one way or the other. And so I think that just keeping that in mind, that at some point this needs to go in front of entrepreneurs and direct TA providers.
Mary, I just wanted to make sure I understand when you said before we launch this, I wasn't quite sure what you're referring to. I think this is where I struggle, because I don't think we individually are launching anything, but there are going to be project teams that will be launching. And I think those people will be doing their stakeholder engagement, including with entrepreneurs, hopefully, right? Each one of those projects. So we're kind of just the, we're a group of people interested in this who may or may not be involved in in eventual project. I mean, Cecilia, maybe help out, because I want to make sure that I find it so challenging, but I understand, Mary, where you're coming from too. I just wanted to make sure I understood what this you were referring to.
Well, I felt like, the reason I got involved in this is because I felt like we were developing a framework to normalize ecosystem building, a framework to make sure that it was known in the communities, that everybody within the communities were involved, and basically almost like a toolkit for communities to do ecosystem building. So that's sort of what I came into this thinking we were doing. So when I say putting out the product, I mean putting out basically, here's the steps to follow, here's the terminology to utilize, here's all the different goals that we have. Before you put those out there as best practice, you want to make sure that it actually is. I don't know. I know that, I think maybe that's where my problem is for you. I think I just have maybe a different idea of what we're doing here. And I'm a doer, not just like so for me, it's like, I want a product, I want something useful that I can bring back to my community.
Okay, so let's delve into that a little bit. Eric, what are we doing here?
What are we doing here? So I think I've got a lot of different ideas. I'm not sure, I won't answer that question, but I think there are some different products and projects that we're working on that are really exclusively to the ecosystem builder. And those might have some involvement or really, want to have some feedback from the entrepreneurs themselves. But not necessarily so. So when I think about and a couple of us have been having a conversation about the regional ESHIP. The audience for that is primarily the ecosystem builder type folks, or at least the discussions we've been having so far. It's really those ecosystem builder and those key stakeholders that are existing to help make the ecosystem better. Ideally, those folks are talking with people in their community about what they need to achieve in these things, but the audience for that event really is the ecosystem builders themselves. when we get to, I think, one of the other projects that is both maybe in this group, but also I want to say in 4, and that's that it's that ecosystem toolkit, which is a little bit more, it feels to me like that's something that deals with and has to interface with entrepreneurs themselves. That's something where, to point earlier, having entrepreneurs that are involved in generating that and providing feedback on what that toolkit looks like, since they are the consumer of a lot of that, they need to be involved. And that's, I think that depends on the different goal and it depends on the different project. I'm not sure if I'm making sense, but that's how I view it, Cecilia.
That sounds good to me. Tiffany, what do you think we're doing here?
What do I think we're doing here? Well, I think in this moment, I think there is a general consensus that, yeah, we are all doers. And so how can we do the things that we are going to do? And we've not quite determined that yet. That's still what we're doing here, is figuring out who needs to be there, what the project teams are going to look like, how to get people involved on the teams, and how do we shift the movement from, you and Brett were talking about earlier, the different phases, the design, the discovery, design, deliver, and we're in that shift to the next D, the doing stage. So that's what I think we're doing here.
Okay, Brett, since you work for a national resource provider and you are working on tools and things, what do you think we're doing here and building?
Well, I think as it pertains to collaborative culture, we are trying to solve for that problem of how do you, get the right people in the room. It goes back to what a lot of people had to say earlier. Get the right people in the room. Make sure that you're speaking on a level that they can feel like they're part of the conversation. There's so much that goes into when we go into under-resourced neighborhoods and we try to engage people that haven't been at the table before, and they're sitting down with major treetop people in the community that they've never met before, but these are people who have made decisions for them traditionally with varying effect. So, part of it is, you need that inclusive approach just around how you gather people at the table and how you have the conversation. And then, we're trying to find ways as a group here. This was my headache that we talked about before, but how do you overcome a lack of consensus when different people have different perspectives on what needs to happen to fix a problem? And no matter how much you've talked about it, they just can't quite get there. What are some of the best methodologies that we can develop and apply at scale in ecosystems across the country that will navigate those situations so that, while again, everybody doesn't walk out happy, they at least walk out feeling heard and, having an authentic level of engagement with the strategies that have been developed, even if, it wasn't necessarily their first choice. So I think this is like a community of practice that can work a lot on those types of things, because those are commonalities. I work in 7 different cities, and so you start to see very quickly the different kinds of things that emerge. Those are commonalities in every one of those cities. You have people that look at each other once they walk in the room and they're like, I know you, and we don't get along. And from the background that I bring to the table right now, I've already made up my mind. And so you got to get past that. And then you have people that are, these people, they walk in and they hear the way the conversation's going. They say, this is not my conversation. This is not the words I use. This is not the understanding that I have. And I feel alienated and I'm going to withdraw from the process. Those are very real things. And they're very, this is just part of being human, right? Is that we fail to connect in so many ways. And so I like the idea of this group saying that while we won't ultimately overcome all of those challenges, we'll at least develop some strategies that everybody can use and apply to hopefully minimize them and remove the obstacles to potential success.
That's great. Thank you. So I want to talk about a couple of things because I know some people have to hop off. So I'm curious to hear maybe some ideas of what you would like to delve deeper on these calls, and the subjects that you'd like to cover, or the complexity, because really collaborative culture, the complexity that's behind so much of this. And I know that one of the things that we discussed was the hurdles and how to overcome them. And this blog post that I've been working on is really about the reality for me, in that that's the work. The collaborative part isn't writing over or pushing aside the obstacles that are in the way, the problems that arise. It's working through them. That's the actual work of collaboration. And what I've realized is, when we push those things aside, or we steamroll over them, or try to circumvent them, that the problems themselves don't actually go away. The people go away. So you think the problem's gone, right? Because now they're no longer showing up. But that's not that the problem went away, because it usually ends up festering. So that problem, like Brett was talking about getting the people in the community that don't trust each other. Well, if you don't work through that mistrust right then and there and throughout the whole process, then one of them will stop coming to the table, right? It may be that both of them get up and never come back. So that doesn't mean that problem goes away. Those people in those communities are no longer represented. And that's a loss for everything, right? That's not a collaborative culture. There's always going to be people that aren't included. So that's a really messy thing, and I think we could spend hours talking about stuff like that. There's also the lens that we view things through. So I don't know I know Eric was at the first ESHIP summit. I don't remember who else was there on this call, but David McConville talked about the paradigm, or the lens that we look through stuff that happens, and I can share it with you all in a follow-up email. But how we went from one era to the next, from the industrial age and the agrarian age, and it shifted our mindset and how we view things that we look at. So before Malika has to hop off, I want to throw another question out there. So Norris brought up this thing that we could maybe do when we talk about these calls, and what we can do in community that we can't do anywhere else. So all of the stuff that we work on is done in individual communities and such. But the thing that we can all do together is we can be a good resource for each other. So he said something about an unreasonable ask. I don't know if that's quite the terminology that he put into it, but it was like the wild ask, or something that you wanted to throw out there that you could use help with. Okay. And so anybody who's been to 1 Million Cups, that the 1 Million Cups community, to wrap up their presenters at the end of the presentation, asks, so what can the 1 Million Cups community do for you? I want to end calls by saying, what can the ESHIP community do for you? So think about that for a second. As you are on this call, you're part of the community, and maybe it's an off-the-wall thing, like he gave us an example about somebody needing a Bill Gates quote, and through the network of the community, they not only got Bill Gates to give a quote for this book that this woman was writing, but ended up with an interview, right? So it may be something wacky and wild. It may be something like, I just need somebody to check in on me every so often to make sure that I'm not losing my mind. Any of those things is all game. So I'll start with Malika. So Malika, what can the ESHIP community do for you? And
Uh,
also, what would you like to learn about?
what can the ESHIP community do for me? Right now, I feel like I'm good. As you were saying this question, I was like, okay, what do I need? What's immediately on my mind? I Global Entrepreneurship Week is coming up, and I want to do a session, an intimate conversation on geared towards underrepresented ecosystem builders, about how not to be a gatekeeper. And if you have resources, like something that you've read, or, information around kind of maintaining your sense of openness when you move through positions where you get power, if you have anything that kind of relates to that, and I'm probably not being very clear, but because it's still in my mind, but I think, as we move to spaces where people are asking us questions like, give us names for this, or who do you think should be involved in this meeting, or who can, who should apply for this, whatever, we have to constantly have a sense of openness in our minds so that we don't create gates. And so if you read something like that, or you have anything like that, if you can send it my way, that'd be great. Oh, I need a pop. Okay, Tiffany. And I have to go. So I'm sorry I won't get to listen to everybody else's thing.
Bye, Malika. So I guess what I'm on the hunt for right now are some resources for building. My kids here, you say hi. We're building an infrastructure from the ground up. And I found a really good book, and I don't remember their names, but it's from Casey SourceLink, and there's two authors who, it's really, really good. But everything that I have done so far in my job has been just kind of pulling, all of these pieces together from what I hear other people doing, and it seems to work, but I'm really looking for something that's more structured. And as I'm saying it out loud, I mean, that might be what we're all doing right now. So I don't know, but I'm looking for like something that's more academic, I guess, that has some real evidence of best practices to build an infrastructure from the ground up. So that's what I could use. How about you, Brett? How can we help you?
Thanks, Tiffany. So for me, we work a lot in the ESHIP mindset, but we also have a unique approach on top of that. And all of my work falls on the unique approach, the non-ESHIP approach, which, I mean, the Venn diagram is strong, the overlap is strong, but there is a uniqueness to it. And so for me, coming into this environment, the help for me is seeing community-based ecosystem building versus, and then letting that kind of top down, filter down to all levels of a community so that entrepreneurship can be accessible for everyone in that city, versus when I work with the cities I work with, we go and we find specific neighborhoods for whom access to opportunity is poor, for whom poverty is high, for whom racial diversity is strong. And then we, in a 5-block radius, try to beta test some ideas. And that's such a different, from the ground up approach. So I love this group because I can learn about macro processes that I'm not learning about in trying to solve for micro challenges. And who do we have left? Oh, I don't know who that is. So it gets to be you, Eric.
Yeah, I'm experiencing internet congestion at the moment, but I don't necessarily, I don't know that I have an ask. I repeatedly don't have a particular ask. And I don't know that everyone has an ask all the time. But I do like having an opportunity for folks who do have a big ask to get it out there, and because you never can tell if the network's going to support it. I think the question, I might be, I don't know, doing a different spin on your question, Cecilia, is I'm sort of grappling with like the purpose of the call, and I'm trying to figure out, like, is there a single easy question? Well, it's an easy question to ask, but a tough question to answer. And I'm wondering, are we looking for more opportunities for collaboration among ecosystem builders? Are we doing something that's a little bit higher level, which I think is that whole culture question? Or are we looking at something that's a little bit, earlier in the, a little upstream, which is, are we looking at ways that we can build trust between ecosystem builders? And I think any of those questions, if that ends up being a focus for a month or a particular call or some other kind of thing, I think each of those has slightly different answers that are all useful to be asking about how we engage with each other as ecosystem builders, but also in the lens that we use to look at the different projects. So my question, I guess, or my big ask is, how do we answer that question? And I will hand it off to Mary.
That's a good one. Eric, I'll take that one too. The way that you guys can help me right now is I would like a task. I would like a tangible item that somebody within the ESHIP framework, like within this call system, to help move forward collaborative culture. So goal 2, I want to have a task within that I can tangibly work on and provide a benefit back to the group.
Okay, so challenge accepted, Mary. I think that if you could start seeding the conversations around what a 10 to 15 minutes with the scope of collaborative culture in several ways, like Eric had discussed, like what are good subjects to delve deep on and have discussions around. So if we were to do, let's say, the first 15 minutes of the call would be project teams kind of giving a very brief update of the status of their project, what they need, what they're working on, what they want. And then I can share what's going on in the Kauffman side of things and the ESHIP community overall. Then if we had a 10 to 15 minute like learning part, what that could consist of, and then we could use the following half an hour to have open discussions or further dialogue or share ideas around that topic or learning, like what that would look like. So if you're looking for a task, I think that's a task that benefits this call in particular and the community overall. That would be great. I'm always looking for a 2-sentence TLDR, so too long, don't read, of these calls, so that I can post that along with the video. I'm working on redoing the dashboard currently. So just so you know, anybody who's on the call who looks at the dashboard, we're going to do a page per goal for each of the goals, so that we'll be able to add project canvases to the dashboard, so you'll be able to visibly see like what projects are being worked on out there that you may be involved in or whatnot. We're hoping to have an updated list or a running update from each of the project teams, so that it's not contingent on this call to be a circling point. You can interact with the project teams without me being a gatekeeper on any of that stuff. So, so those are all the things. So yeah, basically that's it. So the 2 things that I'm working on are trying to get all of those commitments that all of you made at the ESHIP Summit that said, I want to lead, count me in, or keep me in the loop, along with the project canvas. I'm trying to get that all on a spreadsheet. I can tell you honestly, it is one of my least favorite things to do is data entry. So, so it's taking a little longer because I have to do it in spurts. And then The other thing is to load up the dashboard so Christine can make it look pretty and presentable, because that's also something that I would gladly hand over to Christine in making sure that she calls herself a type lowercase a personality. So so she will be lowercase a in getting the things presentable. So any other things going on? No? Well, then it's a wrap. I will look forward to speaking with all of you soon, and I will email you the Dan McConville Firestarter talk, because that's a really interesting thing, and maybe I'll post it also on the Slack channel so we can all have more conversations about that, because let me tell you, I think it's taken me the better part of 2 years to fully understand all this stuff that he was talking about. So David McConville. Anyway, have a great rest of the week, and we will talk to you soon.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.